Okay, third time's the charm. Oh, I hope this is working. Oh my goodness. I've recorded this honestly probably 4 or 5 times and there's been a problem near the end. So I'm just trying to redo it. I'm just trying to teach you about the Iroquois. Okay, so good morning. Sorry about the delay. I had all intentions of doing everything on time. It sometimes doesn't work out. Either way, as you can see by the title and the title of the post that we've been having recently, we are moving on to a new topic. Alright, so when I first started teaching you, we started talking about the principles of democracy. Right, so we talked about what actually makes up a democracy. How can we define a nation as a democracy? And that was through the pillars, which was equity, fairness, freedom, and representation. If that, if there, yes, if that, if a country can checkbox all of those things, we could probably say it's a democracy. What we wanted to look at after that was a historical reference, the foundations of democracy. What kind of led to those pillars? And then that took us to ancient Athens, where we looked at a kind of direct form of democracy, and we looked at how people were able to participate. Now the question was it fair, was it equal? That we can't say for certain. Right? We can speculate, we can say probably not, which then would say, is that really a good example of a democracy? That's a question you have to ask yourself. From there, we're actually going all the way from the foundations of democracy in ancient Athens and Greece, and we're bringing ourselves to North America, where I'm from, right? But I'm actually not from close by what we're going to talk about. We're coming all the way to New York and Ontario, right? So this is where the Iroquois people, another example, a historical example of democracy, where they existed, where they habited, where they lived. Through this, we can see, I'm just drawing this, there's an invisible line you may not be able to see in the video. So on one side of this is modern day Canada, on the other side is modern day United States. This was, but everything that we're going to be talking about happened long before, not long before, but definitely before these borders were made. And it's something to remember and think about, is that this continent of North America had a people, culture, history, long before any Europeans came over and settled it, right? Colonized it. So the people we're talking about, we're going to be focusing on their history and their way of life before Western ideals, before people said there's a better way of life. And that's what we're investigating today. On the right here, this is a longhouse. We will talk more about those on Sunday, and a wampum belt. This is very important with their society. We will talk more about that throughout this topic. So the Iroquois people, right, started as 5 nations. Right, you get the Mohawk, the Oneida, the Onondaga, the Cayuga, and the Seneca people. Okay, so this is what the map looked like. If we zoomed in on this image, on this image, that's what it's going to kind of be. This is the map of where the people lived. All right, this was their territories. This is what they kind of actually had conflict over, and we're going to address that conflict. So the Great Law of Peace, all right, this is kind of what happened. How did the Iroquois people go from separate tribes of similar people to one kind of peace league, one confederation, one community, one, not culture, but one definitely group of people? Right, so what we're gonna, if you click on this link, so this image is linked if you're in present mode. If you click on it, it'll bring you to YouTube. If not, there's a little video here. I can't play it. I try to figure it out. That's one of the delays to this morning. Anyway, it will tell you a story about the Great Law of Peace. It'd be very similar to what I go through, but it'll add some imagery, it'll add some more detail, and it tells it from a First Nations perspective, all right? Which is, I think, very important. If I want to know about the history of the UAE, is it best to just read it in a history book sometimes, or is it best to talk to someone who actually was present during the formation, right? Someone from an Emirati perspective. So social study is important because it's acknowledging from certain people's perspective, and this happened to the people, so we should listen to their side. So this is a story about 5 conflicting nations that eventually joined together thanks to Peacekeeper. If you're following along with your notes, this is where, oh, didn't mean to shrink that. This is where you will be writing your notes, all right? Pictures So during this, as you listen or as you read through, as you take your notes, I want you to find 4 images, kind of similar to what I did, that summarize the main points, right, of each of these experiences, of each of these, of all of these notes, of the great law of peace. Anyways, some say it was 1,000 years ago, some say that it was 2,000 years ago, when there was a dark period in the history of the people being the Iroquois people. The Mohawk, the Oneida, the Onondaga, the Cayuga, and Seneca nations were at war with one another. It was a terrible time of cruelty, bloodshed, and mourning. But then, a Huron man, referred to as the Peacemaker, canoed from the western shore of Lake Ontario. He brought with him a message of peace and unity. It took many years, but eventually the Mohawk, the Oneida, the Onondaga, and the Cayuga and Seneca nations unified and formed a peace league. The English referred to it as the Five Nations. Later, they called it the Six Nations because the Tuscarora people came north from the Carolinas, from the deep in the United States, closer to Florida. They came all the way up in the early 1700s to join. The French called this the Iroquois Confederacy. So we might be saying, like, why is it that the English and the French have different names for this? Well, so right now what's happening in North America is it's being colonized. That means a bunch of countries from Europe are coming over and they're starting to build cities and towns and basically establish what Canada and the United States are. The two main countries at this time that were doing this were the French and the English. And they had dealings with the Iroquois people. So as this was happening separately to the Iroquois, the French were saying, oh, it's the Iroquois Confederacy. The English were saying, it's the Six Nations. The real name, though, for this unity is called, of this group of people is called the Haudenosaunee, meaning people of the Long House, which refers to the traditional long bark-covered houses in which the Haudenosaunee lived. Longhouse is also a metaphor for the social, political, and spiritual structure that was put into place by the Peacemaker. 5 Nations, 6 Nations, Iroquois Confederacy, and Haudenosaunee are all different names for the same thing. The Mohawk, the Oneida, the Onondaga, the Cayuga, the Seneca, and Tuscarora nations are distinct and separate nations that belong to the United Nations called the Haudenosaunee. So what you had is you had these separate and distinct, as separate and distinct as any kinds of country, right? And that's something a lot of people don't realize, is even though they were the Iroquois people, right, they were very different in themselves, and that's one of the reasons why they had conflict. But then someone came along, and they united them under the name of the Haudenosaunee. Here we have the English words, the Iroquois words, and their meaning, right, on this slide. English words are kind of how we speak their name, right? This is how we, this is what we refer to them as people, right? The Mohawk people. And so, obviously, the only story I know is more about the Mohawk. Is if you think about Mohawk, right, you think about the haircut, right? So historically, what has been said, and you can disprove this if you want, right, is that the people had this kind of hairstyle, and so they referred to them as that, or the hairstyle came from that. They did not refer to themselves as the Mohawk people, though. They had an Iroquois word, right? And I'm not even going to try to pronounce these. But I think what it is this is introducing some elements you're going to learn in grade 7 social studies about they had their own identity, and the English and the French had an identity for them. So what I want you to do on your worksheet, if you scroll down, is I gave you the 2 maps. I want you to look very closely at these 2 maps before and after the 5 Nations and 6 Nations became a thing. And I want you to say, what are some differences between the maps, right? What are anything? I want you to do at least 2 differences between the maps. Then, why do you think there's a difference between the way the English words and the Iroquois words for each nation? Why don't they have the same name, right? Why don't the English refer to it? So it's something to think about. And then last, this is called inferencing. All right, you may not know this answer, but I want you to try to think about it. What could it be? So what role do you think geography had in the creation of the Iroquois Confederation or Confederacy? So geography, remember, is kind of the way the land is structured and how people live in the land, all that kind of stuff. Right? So based on geography, based on the way the land is structured, based on how maybe close everyone is, all right? Why do you think, how did this maybe assist in the creation of a confederation? Once you're done that, we're kind of going to explore the 6 tribes of the Iroquois Nation a little bit. As it's been already said in this video, they were culturally unique and distinct, right? So they were separate, they were different, right? There is maybe not as different, it's hard to compare, but think about the Emirates, all right? Now, the people are very similar, but at the same time, right, someone from Dubai is very clearly from Dubai, whereas someone from Abu Dhabi is very clearly from Abu Dhabi, right? They have different aspects to their culture, right? Historically and probably even in modern day. You can speak better to that than I can, but like, think about how people talk about the Middle East, especially in the Western media, right? You're very different than other countries here, but some people in the United States say this big blanket term saying you're all the same. Something similar happens with First Nations, is they say First Nations people or Haudenosaunee people, and they think they can speak for all of them. What we're going to show, though, in today with introduction, is that they are still different, and they have to actually work together and find things that they had in common in order to make this confederacy work. I think elements of democracy are already coming in, or they should be coming in, right? That idea of compromise, that idea of cooperation. So essentially, though, what you're going to do is you're going to pick one tribe, all right? If you're in present mode, you can click on the headdress right there, and it will take you to a link. If you're not, then I'm going to highlight this. You just pick one of these that you want to do, and you click on the link, and it'll take you to all the information. From there, you have 5 questions to answer. They're not very hard, but it's going to take you to a link, and on this link is going to have answers to all of these things, right? So what you have to do is you have to first identify what is the name of the tribe. That should be the easiest question. You just have to pick what you picked. Put what you picked. And what does the name mean? Well, you have to do some reading for that. What language do they speak? What other Native American tribes did the tribe interact with? Now, something that was a big element and aspect of the societies is that idea of barter and trade, right? In First Nations culture, what you don't have, you traded or you interact with people in order to get. So how did they interact with other groups? What were the role of men and women in this tribe? Were they the same? Were they different? How were they different? And then tell me one thing extra that you learned about their culture. This could be about clothing, music, arts and craft, weapons, food, transportation. You're going to write 2 sentences explaining what is different, what is unique, what's kind of cool about their culture. Something that interests you. You don't have to Google it. All you have to do is click on the link, and you should be able to find all of this information. So yeah, long story short, and I know it's way later than I wanted, and I'll be talking to you pretty soon anyways. This is the introduction of the people, right? Why did they come together in the first place? So before we even talk about the way their society is structured or how they relate to democracy, we got to kind of know about who they are. And that's what we're investigating today. If you have any questions, let me know. I'm here to help you. Have a good day, guys.